And 3, 2, 1. Hello, folks, and welcome back to another edition of A Humanistic Perspective. And this week, we've got another amazing episode for you. I have the privilege of sitting down with Jerry Fu. Jerry Fu is a pharmacist and a conflict resolution coach and an all-around well-cultured man. I look forward to this conversation, and I'm happy to have on Jerry. Thank you, Jerry, for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chad.
Yeah, no problem. So I like to start the show by going back to your adolescent years. I would love to get into the headspace and really understand how you were raised, maybe what was life like with your parents, what was the household atmosphere, what was your school life like, and let's go from there.
Wow, unlocking some interesting stories for sure. Yeah, adolescent years, it was a mix of old school Asian tough love and shaming on top of, trying to fit in and trying to figure out what made me happy and, just wanting to play video games when everything else just, got too hard or complicated.
And whereabouts did you grow up?
So originally I'm from Wisconsin, but I moved to Tennessee when I started 6th grade. So, yeah, it was definitely an adjustment in culture for sure. I knew like maybe 6 other Asian people, they were friends of mine. And then, had to do piano and violin lessons, and then had to do SAT prep books on Saturday mornings when other kids were watching cartoons. And then,
no kidding. You were really put through like a rigorous educational space.
Yeah, I was the firstborn of immigrant parents. And so, they really, pulled no punches when it came to making sure I was going to be, on paper, successful by their standards. Absolutely.
Now, when you're in your headspace as a kid, how are you feeling with this type of parental leadership style? How are you handling it? How are you coping with it? And what do you reflect on that now as an adult?
Yeah. I'll give a quick example to show you the kind of things that we deal with. At one point when my dad was trying to teach me math, I was struggling to grasp the concept. And so for whatever reason, he felt he needed to insult me in order to motivate me to work harder, because I guess somehow if I worked harder, then he wouldn't have to insult me as much. And the specific insult that he actually went to the effort of doing was to teach me 2 words in Japanese. And those 2 words are head, which is adama, and concrete, which is konkuri. And he would tell me, adama konkuri. And so I thought to myself, yeah, you taught me another language just to tell me that I'm stupid. This is what I'm dealing with, right? And it was, that was the way he was brought up, and I guess it worked for him. And even if you thought of something better, in those crucial moments, you're going to lean back on muscle memory, right? And you're going to say, well, this isn't the healthiest method to maybe help him forward, but I'd rather do something than not. And so, sure. It was hard, with just this kid who struggled to feel like he belonged. Just insecurity was the silent stigma for me for the longest time. I just didn't want to admit to people that I was insecure about things, because I was afraid if they found out, they would say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're insecure. And ironically enough, when you're more open about it, you realize how many people actually deal with it. And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, this is normal. This is, it's not ideal, but at least I know I'm not alone with this. 100%. And so, yeah, just in that headspace, I'm at a point now where I can reflect and just give my parents grace and say, hey, you know what? They're just doing the best they could to really just make sure that I was in a space where I became a responsible adult and, had these things, had habits and other routines in place to be sure that I was a contributor to society and I would be a responsible person. But in the moment, it was definitely hard when, my dad would say, hey, you need to go through these SAT prep books one more time. And it was just kind of why? I don't, to do a quick tangent, I talked to another Chinese friend of mine who had a similar story where he just said, I just got so sick of, them putting prep books on me that I just memorized the answers whenever they told me to go through these books, and then I would just play games on my calculator the rest of the time. And it was just kind of like, this is how we are a little too smart for our own good, right? We're just kind of like, okay, what's the easiest way to get them off our backs? It's like, okay, well, this is the system where the loopholes done. Everybody's happy, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
What a brilliant dynamic. So I know for me too, I grew up in a household with tons of adversity too. I have
Mm-hmm.
a parent, I'm a kid of a first generation immigrant myself. And
Yeah.
I do notice a lot of these cultural differences in the concepts of parenting
Mm-hmm.
would affect me to the point where I would go out and I would try and be as involved in the school as possible, because that started to feel
Mm-hmm.
more like a central place of home where I could just be me and escape.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any similar situation to that for you? What were maybe some of your hobbies or some of your coping mechanisms or things that really helped you get through these points of adversity?
Yeah, it's I remember when someone asked me about 10 years ago, he goes, "Hey, are you an approval addict?" And that pretty much I just saw my entire life flash before my eyes, right? It was just I think in some ways the best thing that came out of all this was when I, not to play too many of the stereotypes, but I did what I did. I was on a math team in high school, and sophomore year I started to get really good at it, and I was winning trophies, and it felt great because it was just like, oh, now my parents are happy and people are expecting my intelligence level, things like that. And there was still part of me that wondered how much would be enough, and I think that was really the danger, the silent danger point that I wasn't addressing, because you get a taste of that, right? And then you're just like, oh, I want more of it. And right, I want to build out my resume. I want people to admire me, from even a spiritual standpoint when I became a Christian. And then people would say, wow. And I realized, well, if I memorize just large blocks of scripture, people think I'm profound or insightful. That's okay. To say, hey, how do I get more people to admire me, right? And it becomes a really unhealthy game if you let it get out of control, right? Because all these things that are meant for your benefit, right? Whether it's like exercising or reading or things like that, when you lose sight of the real incentive, I think is when it starts to get dangerous.
I like that. That's a very key note. I want to go back to too, while you're in high school there, did you
Yeah.
have any prospects that you wanted to go down a scientific route and become a pharmacist, or what were you thinking career wise? What was that headspace like?
Yeah. I like to joke that my major was by process of elimination. I don't know about you, because I definitely didn't know what I wanted to do in high school. I was just more led along the lines of conventional Asian, definitions of success, you could say. Because to give some background on that, so two of my cousins, that I grew up with in Wisconsin, they both ended up going to Harvard and becoming doctors. So wow. Harvard educated doctors. So that's already a pretty high standard. And they're saying, hey, Jerry, you want to be a doctor too? It's like, oh, yeah, I guess I could be a doctor. And I went in with the idea of being pre-med, partly because I didn't really have anything else I was that interested in, right? I wasn't the strongest at chemistry or physics. My English essays were, I got by somehow. You figure out the standard 5-paragraph essay. And so it's like, well, what's left? It's like, well, I'm good at memorizing stuff. Yeah, biology sounds great. Let me stick with that. And we had ideas of what it'd like to be a doctor. But as some people have recently shed light on the reasons Asians become doctors, Ronnie Cheng had a great bit on saying, hey, this isn't about patient care. It's about the good life. It's about gaining a quick amount of money and prestige. Right. This is how we improve ourselves. They don't care what skin color you are if they have to address you as MD, right? And it's fair as long as people are honest about it, right? But I have plenty of friends who became doctors because they were successful going down this path, and they're like, oh my gosh, I still have bills and marital stress and I have to raise kids, and this why didn't this end, right?
Right.
They thought that they hit this button of Asian immigrant success, and they think, oh, finally I can exhale. It's like, no, you're just getting started.
Wow. How many people are you seeing that come from a similar cultural background that fall into this bubble or this pattern that you saw in your personal life? Is this something that's common and widespread?
Oh man, I feel like I see it more and more.
Wow.
Just all these people I know, right? They think that med school will satisfy them, or engineering will satisfy them. And even if they don't, they're too afraid to speak up when their parents are the ones pushing them. And so on one hand, right, like this Asian shame that pushed us to be productive and successful, we graduated, finally we got the job, we got married and had the kids, and it's like, why am I not happier? Right. Like, I mean, and there's just this very limited skill set and thinking set that comes with, this immigrant mindset. And again, like, I'll give grace. I understand, hey, we're outsiders. We need to prove ourselves over and over again. But now that that's kind of in place, what do we need to do differently? Right. Jeremy Lin is an easy example, right? He wanted to play basketball, and then all these other Asian parents are criticizing his parents, saying, "Oh no, that's not that he's not going to be successful with that. Like, why do you even bother?" Then he gets into Harvard because there's a shorter line for that, right? And then all of a sudden, all these Asian parents are like, "Wait, what sport does my kid need to play in order to get into Harvard?" Right? They refuse to believe that is a possibility for their kids in order to get into a good school.
That's so fascinating to hear. When did you first reflect and start to actually cognitively realize this was something a part of your life? Because I know, like for me, right, when I was in high school, I didn't know how to grasp or handle or even reflect on the emotions I was facing. So at what period? Was it college for you? Was it later? Was it?
Yeah. I think, it didn't happen until later. Really, okay. It didn't happen until probably about 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, when I really started to wonder, what am I really living for? What do I want in my life? What would be successful for me? And, I'm grateful for the career I've had as a pharmacist so far. It's allowed me a fairly high quality of life, and I've had a lot of great people along the way. But part of it was just recognizing, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was like in a more of a multicultural setting, and I started to realize that what made me an outsider, what made me feel like an outsider, was actually what allowed me to stand out, and how I started to feel unique, right? Like my all these cross-cultural influences that have come through. Salsa dancing is not something I would have chosen for myself, but now it's a hobby that I can't get away from, right?
How did that come about?
Oh God, it's a great journey to amuse you, right? What's funny is still trying to convince a Hispanic women I can dance. It's just like, ¿Quiere bailar? It's like, no, what? Why did I go to all this trouble? So yeah, to unpack that aspect, basically it first started as a freshman in college. There was a formal we were having in the spring, and they said, hey, this time we're going to do salsa dancing. And I tried, and the lesson they taught was terrible. Like it just didn't set us up for success at all. And so, we go to the formal with a couple basic steps, and you're like, this is hard and boring, and I don't know if I'll ever be good at it. So there's this fixed mindset. That's what I did for most of the time. It's like, well, if you're not good at it if you don't get the hang of it after 2 or 3 times, then just don't bother, right? And it's just that wall is closed. And funny thing is, when I got to pharmacy school, which was in Memphis, a friend of mine was like, you have to give it another shot. Like you have to try it again. And so by that time I was sick of studying. And so I went out for more lessons, and then I actually kind of got pretty good at it, decently. Oh, yeah. And then by the time I was about to graduate, I was like, this is really fun. But then I moved back to Knoxville, where my family was. And there's no salsa scene there. There's a swing dance scene there, which is great. That was actually my first love in terms of social dancing, but I wasn't focused on that anymore. So for many years, there was just this really bad cycle of, I get rusty, I lose confidence, I try to get back out there. I'm like, oh, I missed this. And then, but I'm not working at it enough to sustain that talent and confidence. And then all of a sudden it's this really unproductive loop. And even when I moved back to Houston 11 years ago, I didn't get into dancing. A bunch of the friends that I met at the church that I was starting to go to all were two-stepping. And so I was like, okay, I guess I better learn this instead. But then about 7 years ago, when I started to get plugged back in with a more multicultural group, and this Venezuelan friend was like, hey, they're doing free dancing downtown. You can join us. I did. I tell people all it took was one hot blonde. And I was like, I got to bring my A game to dance with her. And then that's that state of flow, which Cheek Send Me High continually talks about. And then I experienced that for an entire song. And then I said, why did I stay away from this for so long? And then after that, it's just been, oh, I'm back. I got to go dancing like every week.
So, I love that. We have a similar connection there. My buddy Eddie Quiroga in high school, he got me hooked. There was $5 student salsa dancing downtown in the city of Chicago, and I just went and I started going and I fell in love. I'm curious, do you do just salsa, or do you do all the variants like bachata, merengue, salsa, or what's sort of your favorite if you have one?
Yeah, great question. No, I'm happy to meet a fellow dancer, Chad. So glad we were able to connect with you because we could unpack that for a whole nother episode, I'm sure.
I have a couple questions. So.
Oh, please, line them up. We got time. Basically, salsa is easily my strongest. I do bachata. I can do merengue. Merengue, I usually just save the mileage for. I'd rather just I'll sit out the merengue song to save my energy for salsa. I'll go ahead and admit bachata. Like I can do the basic steps. I can't do some of the fancier stuff. Like I'll watch like bachata sensual, and I'm just like, nope, can't roll like that.
Yeah, when they're like entangling their knees together and stuff.
Yeah, and so it's kind of ironic that I struggle to think of myself as a good bachata dancer because whenever I dance with a friend with bachata and I just like, oh, they don't care if I'm good or not, and I actually do
comes out
more stuff I didn't think I was capable of. Yeah, that's the one, and it's just such a great reminder, just like, hey, first have fun. Like when you have fun, your partner will have fun, and it's a great thing like that. But yeah, salsa is my strongest. I actually recently had to acquire onto timing because that's starting to pick up in Houston. A lot more studios are being intentional about making both options available. And so same thing, right? You're just like, oh, I'm not good at this. And then one of my dancer friends was just like, get over yourself and put in the work. You'll be fine. And I said, okay. And so I did.
I'm trying to get more men into it from another male's perspective. What would you say are some of like the best traits or qualities to becoming a partner dancer and going out and social dancing?
Yeah, I love this question because it happens all the time. First, like understand that it's just your choice to have fun. It doesn't matter how much skill other people's have. You can always have more fun. And like the feedback I get from women dancers is always, oh, it's attitude. Yeah, skill has a certain, minimum threshold, but at the end of the day, we rather dance with someone fun than someone who's skilled and stuck up. And I'm the same way. I've tried to dance with skilled people and they just look bored when I'm dancing with them. And it's just like, okay, well, hey, glad I found that out. And yeah, I just won't bother you anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And it's okay. Like I've realized I have to remind myself, even if they get shot down a couple of times, which is still, I can still feel the sting of that, just to trust that, hey, you know what? Just keep asking, right? Just eventually you'll find someone who says yes and just make the most of it and be grateful for that. So yeah, basically the simple formula is if you get up to like an intermediate level of skill, but you make the girl feel alive while you're dancing with her, I mean, yeah, you don't really need anything else.
Sure.
Yeah, you want to have some basic level of competence in timing and technique and making sure that you take good care of her. But the tie-breaking factor is always going to be show her you enjoy dancing with her, right? Make her look good, and you'll be golden.
That's awesome. So if there are any men out there that are hearing this, take that risk, go take the chance. And if you're a younger guy, it's the best way to just meet older women and start to feel comfortable around peers that are, of different ages and variants than you. So I want to go back to college. Let's maybe dive into that period of time. So you go to school for biology. Is that your bachelor's degree?
That was my bachelor's. Yeah, that was my major and what I ultimately finished a bachelor's in. Correct.
Where did you attend university?
Rice University here in Houston.
Okay. And how was that experience? What did you love about school? What do you hate? Do you believe there's still value for kids nowadays to be going to college? And
Yeah, this is a great package to unpack because college, I don't know for people who've read some of Malcolm Gladwell's work, but he talks about, hey, if you're in like science and technology and engineering, you're better off being a big fish in a small pond if you expect to go far instead of trying to take your chances at the biggest ponds and trying to separate yourself at the top. And on one hand, that is kind of insulting where you just kind of like, hey, why wouldn't you want to go up against the best? At the same time, realistically, like play the long game. And so, yeah, basically what I'm trying to say is that, in high school, I finished in the top 10 in my class. But when I got to Rice, I realized there were a lot of people who were much more talented and driven than I was. And what I say about med school and, pre-med in general is that if you don't have a clear target of who you want to be and who you want to serve when you get that degree, you're not going to make it. And that's kind of where I was, is just to say, well, I guess I'll be pre-med. That doesn't work. And so at Rice, it was a very fast-paced environment. Pretty much the kids who were my classmates were already pretty self-driven and, had a level of success that I struggled to match. Partly because, and again, this isn't my mom, but my mom would just, and she's the one pushing me and used to being pushed. Like, she's going to be like, hey, you might want to turn off the TV, right? It's time for you to do your homework. But when I go to Rice, right, she's not there anymore. And I think to myself, oh, great, I can watch all the Sunday afternoon football that I want. And then my grades come back terrible. And then it's like, well, what happened? It's like, okay, I need to really step up my game. And so the really sobering thing was just that in the middle of, getting down on myself about some of the grades that I made and, making some decisions that took away time that I could have been studying. And then the extra shame from my parents that came from that with some of the extracurriculars that I was involved with. I ended up getting a C in organic chemistry, like my fall semester year or sophomore year. And, like when you don't know failure on that level, right? That just feels like death. You're just like, okay, I guess I'm not even going to try to apply for med school with that on my transcript. Jeez. And so I to allow this possibility of going down the med school path anymore, what would a reasonable healthcare path alternative be? And so, I said, well, pharmacy seems to be okay. There's things I like about it. There's still a chance to serve people. It's still certainly respectable. Yeah, let me go down the pharmacy path. And so the interesting thing with pharmacy at the time, it's much more standardized now, but at the time, there was no across the board standard that said prerequisite that you had to have a bachelor's before you started. And so when I applied to pharmacy school my junior year, I got accepted and they said, you can start now if you want, like as soon as you're done with your junior year, just start pharmacy school. And I was not ready for that. My parents, who were kind enough to take care of my tuition bills at the time, were heavily supportive of that. Hey, save us a year of tuition, just get your life started. Just get the next chapters of your life started. And of course, all my friends were like, Jerry, stay, how can you not have a senior year? And that was a hard decision. And the compromise that I made was that I told my parents, I said, okay, if pharmacy school classes can still be used to complete my bachelor's requirements, then I will leave for pharmacy school, because the important thing in their eyes, right, was for me to finish my degree. So if I could do that and still save a year's worth of tuition costs by starting my pharmacy school career early, then
golden.
Then I would honor that. Yeah. So I did, and that was hard. Wow. But it was the right decision. It took a lot of years before I finally appreciated my parents' perspective on this. And it was still nice to walk with my bachelor's with my friends. And admittedly, it was nice to get pharmacy school done a year early anyway, because
yeah, right.
Like I don't need to go through that anymore. But yeah, it was an interesting time for me. I didn't really start to appreciate the undergrad life and the opportunities that Rice had to offer until I got to my junior year, when I was able to focus less on simply getting through classes, because Rice is an interesting environment in that they say, hey, here are all these great extracurriculars and opportunities, and here's classes, figure it out. And, it's not that they didn't have academic support services or anything like that, but you didn't hear a lot of people who use them. And I think almost people didn't want to admit that they would, have to use them if things were kind of rough. So, and it's funny when you have people like, General Schwarzkopf or Nelson Mandela, and you're just like, I have to study, but this once in a lifetime, historical figure is here. I guess I'm just going to get a C on my essay, right? You're just like, I don't know. But it seemed like I had classmates that didn't have to deal with that. They managed to do everything and still not spread themselves thin. So jealous for them, but somehow I survived and got a degree as well. So anyway, yeah.
That's beautiful. So when you're studying the sciences and specifically biology, in your interpretative opinion, what is the most artistically creative, curious, or beautiful part of that science?
Yeah, That's a new question. I haven't heard that in a lot, so thank you.
You're welcome.
I think the beauty of it is just seeing how intricate a process it is, and everything functioning exactly the way it needs to. Obviously there's deviance, and obviously we have things like cancer, stuff like that. But to see such a complex set of chemicals and cells that seem to be on their own level of programming and don't need you to continually intervene in order to function. It's just, the human is a beautiful machine. And the sooner we do more to actually take care of it in a way where we actually truly want the other person to flourish is really, I think, the turning point for all of this. And, because you see all these terrible things where, people are trying to sell candy to diabetics, and, you're just like, you're like, I can't believe, like, why would you think that's a good idea? Like, how do you live with yourself when you talk
about
like
the
that?
bane of existence, the fats and sugars industries in the 90s, that fight.
Yeah. Anyway,
that's so fascinating. I've never really, that's new to me. I like that. It's pushing my boundary of thinking of the idea of autonomy serving as a beautiful and creative system in this biological space.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So you finish your undergraduate degree while in pharmacy school. What's next? Do you immediately go on to be a pharmacist, or where do you go to next?
Yeah, good question. So pharmacy school was definitely an interesting experience. Definitely a contrast from the years at Rice, which, when I was in Knoxville, not a lot of Asians, and the ones that I was friends with by default, I didn't always get along with those. And then I come to Houston, and the irony is that all these other Asians already used to hanging out in their own like crowds, and so I still didn't have any really Asians to hang out with. And I'm like, man, I thought I would finally get over feeling like an outsider. And then Memphis, interestingly enough, when I was there for pharmacy school, went back to the, critical mass of Asians. All right, we're hanging out together. And, this time around, we're a little more mature. And so we actually, got along better and, things like that. But, pharmacy school was school. And then, it was also an interesting time because it was, in grad school, we have to live off campus. At Rice, we were very sheltered on campus. They took care of all our meals. We didn't have to worry about any of that. But in Memphis, we were kind of on our own. We had to find our own housing. We had to take care of our own meals. And so that was an adjustment for sure. So I finally got into a good routine my third year in school, right before rotation started. And then, had to start thinking about, what are my career options and career choices? What would be the best thing? The schools all have this vision for the students to become clinical specialists, where you work in a hospital. Doctors, once they establish a diagnosis, it's up to the pharmacist to manage the therapy. But the thing is, it's one thing for the schools to have that vision. It's another to actually create a space where people will find jobs being able to do that. And, in the meantime, you have this entirely different industry in chain pharmacy, which has their own agenda and offers very fat paychecks to work for them. And so this is where the Asian definition of success comes back into play. And my mom, when she saw my offer letter, specifically from the chain pharmacy that she was a fan of, insisted that I take that job offer, even though friends in the industry all were like, no, like, you don't want to work for them. Like,
right. Find a cool niche firm or something.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And so, I moved back home for my fourth year, just because it allowed me to save some money and things like that. And so my mom was very much in my ear about where she felt my life needed to go. And, at the time, in dealing with conflict, coming back to that angle, right, I was just like, oh, let me just give in. I'm just tired of having this argument. All right, let me just sign with this company, which after the initial orientation, I realized was a very rude awakening as to what I actually signed up for. And so all of a sudden I'm working every other weekend. I have no social life, and then I'm working these hours. And this was still when pharmacy was still in the good, in good
like
shape.
Heyday.
Yeah. And, I just was, I was really in my mind, like I was just a very, blatant pessimist. I'm just like, oh, I guess my best chances at a career that I want are over. My mom's trying to push me to marry this girl. I guess, all my best chances on that are also out the door, all these other things. And I was just like, I guess, my kind of like back to the whole med school thing. When that door closed, I guess I'm just not going to be a doctor. And so, and people are like, why aren't you happier? Like, you have like this nice paycheck, you know, you've got this great girl lined up, and, you know, why aren't you happier about this? And I was just like, because it's not what I wanted. Right. I mean, for me at the time, you know, the irony was that my mom and I wanted the same thing for myself. I wanted a good job. I wanted to marry a girl, but not on her terms. And so, yeah, after she gave me bad advice on the career side, I definitely didn't trust her on the relationship advice, even though, like, ironically, she would have been better suited to start off with the relationship stuff first, you know, because she's never worked a day in pharmacy in her life, but somehow she felt like she felt like she was the expert on it because she was my mom. So, yeah.
That sounds like mothers.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
I wanted to go, touch, while you're a pharmacist, while you're going through school, what are some of the major ethical dilemmas that a pharmacist or someone who is in that career path might face? And how do you handle those as a pharmacist?
Great question. I mean, one of the simpler but more profound examples that there was some controversy over back when I first started my pharmacy career, was when pharmacists in, like, I think Illinois, for working for Walgreens, refused to dispense the morning after pill for women who might have accidentally gotten pregnant. And so Walgreens says, no, you're not allowed to impose your personal sense of ethics or religion in these situations. You're supposed to just sell the pill if they say they need it. And the pharmacist got fired. And, you know, so what do you do with that? You're like, well, I have my integrity. It's like, well, does pay the bills? And it's like, well, there are, you know, that's a fun one. Other times, pain management is a huge area that's subjective. And I'll give the other extreme. So one of my friends needed hip replacement surgery a couple of years ago. And right at this stage, none of the chain pharmacies around where he lived would fill his prescription. And even with clinical documentation, even though he's like, you know,
was it an opioid or some sort, or?
Yeah. It was a Norco prescription. And so, they're like, oh no, we're just not going to deal with that controversy. And it's just like, he's in a walker and he has like his discharge notes. I don't know what else you need to prove that this is for a legitimate medical need. But yeah, I mean, in Houston, the people, I'll call it the dark side, like a lot of independent pharmacies, since they struggle to really keep their lights on and bills paid, because trying to compete against chains is a lost cause, they resort to filling cash scripts where there's doctors that basically
methadone, right?
You pay them money. Yeah, you pay them money. They give you a combination of Norco, Soma, and Xanax. And they're just like, well, you know, I'd rather stay alive with compromised ethics than to admit that I need to shut down the business because I don't want to feel like a failure. And so, yeah, sometimes the line between ethics and money is very tough, especially if you're on the business side. For pharmacy, you know, they make it sound like a no-brainer. Oh, well, you know, duh, you've worked too hard to get your license for someone to take it away just because you know your paychecks got desperate. But that's exactly the kind of thing we're dealing with. So yeah, a lot of questions around, birth control and how that can be used, and then legitimate pain needs. And really, you know, I can't speak for everybody because they're all on different planes. But at the same time, the simple question to ask yourself is, like, what decision do you have to make so you feel good about yourself when, you know, what lets you sleep well at night, right? Like, what can you say, you know, hey, we disagreed, but I know I did the right thing for myself and my license, and just trust that the patient will be able to find someone else that needs to accommodate it, assuming it's a legitimate medical need. Because if it's not, like, stand your ground. You've worked too hard for that license for someone to pressure you into filling a script that may not be legitimate.
Sure. That's a fantastic, well-rounded answer. Thank you.
Thanks.
The opioid epidemic. What are your thoughts on it? Is there anyone I don't really like to put blame on someone, but is there a time or a period that we can blame? How do we get out of a situation like this? Basically just overall generalized thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a complicated situation. I think the financial motive on the healthcare side also just makes it really difficult, because when you have companies like Purdue, which say, no, OxyContin is not dependent. It doesn't cause dependency. But then you have all this empirical evidence that says otherwise. When basically that's the biggest factor I have a problem with, is when people are simply like, when the first priority is money and not the patient's well-being, right?
100%.
And so, with that in mind, I think the biggest thing is just to say, okay, what are some ways that we can help this patient's pain from a whole body approach, right? And not just a pill standpoint. I'll be happy to tell people, the more time I spend around drugs, the less I hope I ever have to use them. That's
fantastic.
I'll give an example. So a doctor friend of mine, he has a pain management practice, and he does everything he can to not resort to opioids. And he understands, he's like, hey, there's a physical, there's a mental, there's a spiritual and emotional aspect to pain. And we need to really get to the bottom of that. And whether that involves physical therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, let's, treat the whole body first. And if opioids are necessary, sure, but in a very conservative way. I think that would be a good start.
Fantastic. So I want to talk about holistic medicine, and I think one of the ones that's been coming up recently, it's more natural, is psychedelics, and using natural psychedelics for therapy and cognitive benefits. What is your stance on that, knowing and having an understanding of biology in that, and do you think it could be beneficial?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting opportunity, I think, for healthcare to really dive into. I know doctors who don't believe in it at all. I know others that are completely sold on it. In fact, I know pharmacists that can get certified in CBD products just to say, hey, look, we're going to help you navigate this well. My simple take on it is this, just because I haven't done a lot of research on it personally, but
sure.
On one hand, if the brain needs help because it's stuck in some, unproductive thinking or some habits that is causing, maybe you need to alter the brain chemistry a little bit in order to, kind of give it a boost. By the same token, if that's the only way you're going to help a person get through the pain and just completely deny them the reality of the situation, that's also not healthy either. So much like alternative medicine therapies and other supplements, right? Most of what I tell people is, hey, you know what? If whatever's been working for you or whatever you've been trying beforehand isn't working, sure. I'm not here to rule out any options that you might need to consider. At the same time, just understand, the risks. Just make it a very educated decision if you're going to proceed with this therapy of any kind.
Okay. Very nice. I want to ask about your interpretation of the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccines, and both that plus just mRNA technology in general.
Yeah. Just, we're going through the whole circuit here, huh?
Sure.
That's great. These are real issues and people need to know them.
Sure.
So in terms of the vaccine, what's interesting is I've heard Peter Hotez, who's locally here at Baylor. I've heard a couple of different scientists really stump hard for the vaccine. And while people can have their concerns, they make the case that if they don't have integrity in this process, then they're the ones on the line. They're the ones that won't get any business. They won't have their reputation is in tatters, right? If the case that they're making for vaccines is not without merit. And so, once the vaccine started getting distributed, people, whether they like it, whether they want to realize it or not, we've been pushing to get back to pre-COVID levels for quite some time now, almost at a rate that I'm a little alarmed at, even though as I'm happy to hug people again, I'm happy to see smiles again. I believe the vaccine is worth investing in. And I can say this for sure because I'm thankful for the fact that I am vaccinated and I went to a lot of trouble to get that vaccine. And I'm happy for the security and the freedom that it's currently offering me. And, on the flip side, I have a technician who refuses to get vaccinated. She's just like, nope, I'm spooked by it. And it didn't matter that her parents got infected and then she had to stay home because of contact tracing. And then, she's all mad about the fact that she had to stay home. And it's like, but what do you expect? You refuse to get the vaccine. Your family, you may probably discourage your family from getting it, and then they got the actual. Like, what would you rather deal with, the side effects of the vaccine or the actual virus, right? And vaccines, like anything, are a calculated risk, but it's a very wise calculated risk. Again, I'm happy to honor people's decisions. I certainly can't push them toward anything. And at the same time, I would ask them, well, what risk are you willing to take? The risk of the vaccine side effects or the risk of getting COVID without any protection? In terms of mRNA technology.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go to next.
Yeah. It's, I'd have to do a little more research, but at the same time, from my initial, shoot from the hip take is, hey, you know what? It's an opportunity. Right. And the more that we refine it, the more we can do with it, the bigger the benefit that we can have for our quality of life and our health if we are willing to invest in real measures to help it really grow. It's the same thing with the vaccine, right? People keep criticizing it or they refuse. And I won't get into the whole anti-vax thing. It's just not they've made up their minds regardless of what I might say. But but all I would say is, hey, if this technology is worth, if we're willing to experience a little failure and learn from that failure and to do it quickly in a way that we can really build out more products that can really help protect us from preventable causes, then let's do it.
Fantastic. What are your thoughts on the handling of the initial outbreak of the pandemic in the United States?
I mean, it was terrible. I mean, what else can you say? Well, and part of it, and the reason to give some context to that answer, I don't know. Have you read either of Bob Woodward's books on Trump? Fear or Rage?
No, I have not, but I will add those to my list.
Yeah, and another one that really
who is the author?
Bob Woodward. He was the guy involved with Deep Throat and the Nixon, scandal back in the Watergate scandal back in the day. Same journalist. Yeah.
Okay, very nice.
And also Mary Trump, his niece, wrote a book called Too Much and Never Enough. And basically, and she's a clinical psychologist, and she basically gives her take on not only from a mental health aspect, but also from a family aspect as to how.
Oh, interesting.
And basically what I'll quote is just the fact that, Mary Trump at the end of this book, not to give away too much, guys, but she says, if Trump had been so insecure and wanted to feel like he deserved all the glory for the success of triumphing over this supposed pandemic, like if he just delegated to the right people in place and just authorized, PPE to be made and, lock down and try to reassure people, we might have come out a whole lot better. And I'm sure I'm going to get some hate mail for what I just said, but it's when all you hear about is his ego, and apparently they withheld PPE from, states that wouldn't kiss his ring and, all these other things, just wanting to go back to his set of beliefs instead of really listening and learning and, relying on the strength of the people on his team. Right. It's just alarming, really, that, we had to lose 500,000 people to get this lesson across. And then even now, people still refuse to get the vaccine, even though supply is in stock here. And then there are other countries, that want the vaccine but can't get it. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's tough. And I can say this because, I saw COVID happen firsthand. Thankfully not with my family, but I met at some point my pharmacy team. We were down to me and my lead tech because one of my techs got COVID. She was out for 2 weeks. My driver got a milder version of COVID, but he had to stay home. And so at one point it's just me and my lead technician playing a 2-man game. Hey, you pick, I roll. Which one do we do? And we just waited until pretty much everyone was back at full strength. And admittedly, I was at a breaking point.
Wow.
So this isn't just me hating on administration for a lack of. This is me saying, hey, I saw this up close and firsthand, and we definitely did not handle this well.
No, I agree. I think no matter what side you're on, you could definitely see that there were some critical infrastructure and large scale initiatives we could have handled or done, at least, that would have been very, very effective in the short term.
Yeah. You're like, oh yeah, bad news. No, you're fired. And it's like, nope, that doesn't work, guys.
It works for reality TV though.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. You're right. For reality TV, it's wonderful.
So I want to get back into you're a pharmacy tech, you're down that route now, and then you want to become a conflict resolution coach.
Yeah.
What sparked you? What finally made you inside of yourself be like, you know what, I'm changing my path. I know what I want to do now. I know I want to help others and give back in this way.
Yeah, it was. It's definitely an interesting path for sure. Because so many people are saying, "How did you go from healthcare professional to this?" Like, and in my head, it makes sense because I was the one who lived it. So
Right.
to bridge that gap, yeah. So basically, it goes like this: is that after 5 years at the chain pharmacy that I decided was no longer going to be my career choice, I wanted to actually get into teaching students. I wanted to have some semblance of an academia job. And unfortunately, because I had settled for the fat paychecks that chain offers, I didn't go for a residency. I didn't go for any other kind of, postdoc training for a conventional university job. And
Sure.
so I said, well, my other friend seems to be working and she seems to be teaching students, but she's not in academia either. Let me ask her, about her path. And so it turns out she works for a pharmacy consulting company here in Houston. And so me being in Knoxville at the time, and I showed her my CV and resume, I was just like, hey, I want to get into teaching. How do I get into teaching? And she says, hey, you know what? I just got promoted and my previous teaching position is open. Do you want to apply for this? And I said, absolutely. Let me throw my hat in the ring. And so, I do a good job during the interviews. And next thing I know, I am taking a part-time position. I'm foregoing, the nice salary and the benefits to take on a part-time position, driving from Knoxville to Houston to take on this job. And, I thought this would be it. And I thought, oh, this is the last company I ever have to work for. 11 months later, I get fired. And it was my fault. I tell people now, I didn't want to see it at the time. And this is the term, I'll say the term that I didn't have a chance to elaborate in the previous podcast on another platform, but I had the term successful victim. By that, I say, hey, you know what? There is some degree of success. Obviously, we're taught not to get this degree, but some things are still unfair. There's still a sense of entitlement that I still had. And unfortunately, it showed up in this job. And so when things didn't go the way my supervisor wanted to, I would spin it or, blame or make excuses. And, 11 months in that regard is very generous. Like it should, I probably should have been fired a lot sooner. And so, part of the problem though, is that I just didn't know how to deal with my boss who was upset with me, but I'd struggled to deal with conflict throughout most of my life anyway, because of the way that I was brought up. We're not supposed to rock the boat. We're not supposed to share when we're upset about something. We're just supposed to keep it to ourselves and just hopefully get over it after enough time. And so, this was the blueprint for conflict. Even in chain pharmacy, they're just like, hey, no, patient's always right. If they're upset with you, you got to find a way to make them happy. And it's just kind of like, why do I hate myself at the end of the day? Right. And even though I took care of the situation, but I didn't feel like I had a chance to stand my ground or anything. And so, basically I'll get to how that transitions to conflict resolution and through my career journey. So, cool. After I got fired, I ended up at an independent job, house of cards, filling for crooked doctors, paychecks were bouncing. It was just a bad situation. And it comes back to the ethics dilemma. You're just like, well, you won't pay me unless I fill these crooked scripts. So, okay, I guess I need to do that.
Right.
And I had a very misguided.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a very misguided view of grace, where it's just kind of like, well, even though he didn't hold up his end of the bargain, let me honor mine. And everyone's like, Jerry, if he's not paying you, leave. It's like, okay, I should have. So the next company my friends got me with was a better company, but money was tight. And they said, hey, we like you, but we can't pay you more than 8 hours a week. And I said, uh-oh. And so they said, well, if you want more hours, you can go to Austin. And I said, okay, I guess I'm going to go work in Austin, which, people are like, you could end up in worse places. And that's true. But it just wasn't home at this point. So anyway, so this is 2012 now. And so I'm working out in Austin with no idea what my life would look like. And that summer, I was asked to help facilitate some leadership workshops through a pharmacy nonprofit that some of my friends run. I had been facilitating workshops on the fraternity side, but not on the leadership side. And so they said, hey, we know you facilitate. Can you help us with this? And I said, sure. And so the weird thing is with teaching leadership, something kind of flipped in my head, because before, leadership was something that was hard and I would never be good at. And then after seeing it modeled for me, and then also like having to teach it to other people, I said, well, what if I allowed for that possibility? What if I could be a good leader? what would that involve? What kind of work would that involve? What would that look like? How would I carry myself? And so when the opportunity came to either stay part-time in Austin, which was a great job, great team, or take on a full-time manager position in Houston, by now Austin started to feel a little more comfortable, but I knew like Houston was home, and I was like, I can't stay safe. I need to take on these manager challenges. And so even then, I struggled with conflict because I struggled to write up technicians who were underperforming. I struggled to have difficult conversations. And eventually I got in trouble with management because they said, hey, we don't think you're managing your techs well. And so we gotta do all that. And so that was hard. And then even after the next couple of jobs after that, I got better at just problem solving, which is what I think kept my doors open for more jobs. But the interesting thing is the jobs weren't lasting very long anyway, because the business models are very tough for independents to survive in a field with chain pharmacies. Sure. So on one hand, I was hopping, to new icebergs. On the other hand, they were still icebergs, and they were still melting quickly. And so 4 years ago, when my previous job went under, I had to ask myself, I was like, well, I'm tired of chasing scripts. I'm tired of fighting insurance companies that tell me how much I'm worth and how much they're willing to pay me for the same amount of work. But I really love teaching these leadership workshops. What would a career in that look like? And so I started to, ask some coaches in the space, how do you build a business? How do you establish a career in this kind of field? Because I know what kind of help I wish I'd had when I was growing up to deal with, cultural challenges and just people who were upset with me, and I didn't know how to stand my ground or speak up for myself. And so now, I wanted to do that full time. It was more focused on leadership development, but in all the conversations I've had with my clients and then other workshops I've done for groups, everything, like every one of my friends says, hey, like it's right in front of you. Like your niche is conflict, because everyone deals with some kind of unresolved conflict. And it's not just from a professional side, it's from a personal side too. Just relationships and volunteer situations where people flake out, or, they're just not getting back to me, or they're avoiding things. I've even had to evict a roommate at one point, and that was a lovely lesson.
That's a big conflict there. Eh?
Yeah. Tell me about it. And you realize basically the turning point, right, was when you realize that the situation will not get better on its own. And it's ultimately up to me to step in to do something about it, because as long as I don't, they're not going to do it. And I have to, realize that I can't afford to tolerate this anymore. So yeah, it's hard and difficult, but the cost of not acting is so much worse.
I like that. So I want to go to the principles of a leader from your perspective. What is the secret sauce? What is the essential traits, characteristics? What does that look like? What does that feel like? How do I, as a person, embody a leader? Yeah.
So a lot of great literature out there on, leadership. And what I've learned and what I've realized is that every leadership coach has ultimately their own thesis. There are a lot of common themes over what makes a leader. And so my thesis involves 9 essential qualities and skills. Imagine a Venn diagram, a conventional Venn diagram with integrity in the center. And then on the left circle, write the words within me. And there's 4 things there, which are vision, personal growth, resilience, and responsibility. And then on the right circle, write the words beyond me. And then in the circle, you write things. There's 4 things. They are developing others, communication, conflict resolution, and legacy. And so that is my proprietary leadership framework.
Damn, I like that thesis. Interesting. And so it's almost as if we have to use integrity to balance the constructs that we find on both sides of the dichotomy of both in me and beyond me.
Yes. Yep. Basically, to elaborate on that, do I have integrity in character? And then also beyond me is the integrity in my relationships. Because if you don't have integrity in both, one leads to the other. The two are absolutely interconnected. Without integrity, neither side will work.
So this is fantastic. This is a great goal and a finish line. What is the roadmap or the steps that one could take if they don't possess these skills right now to get there?
I mean, I think there's a great principle in the Heath brothers books, which I continually recommend to people. And specifically in the book Switch, one of the tips that they offer is to shrink the change. And so basically you don't need to master this, tonight, right? No one's asking you to run a marathon tomorrow. But given that integrity is such a key point in terms of how you honor your promises, right? How you do, who you are when no one's looking, how you act, even if other people are looking, right? How do you build integrity, right? Do I need to start keeping promises? Do I need to start making sure that I don't make promises that I won't be able to keep? Because so often, right, I feel like a big frustrating point for me is when people say, oh yeah, let's get coffee sometime. But that's just the social pleasantry. They have no real way of like follow through to say, hey, well, here's 3 days. Like, I'm available for coffee. Which one works for you? Right. Just go ahead and close the deal. Like right then and there. don't just like, oh yeah, let's do coffee sometime. It's like,
it's so funny you say that, because I have this big pet peeve of mine, and it's when people ask, oh, how are you doing? Just as a pleasantry, though, because it really undermines and demeans the purpose and the sake of A, humans and us wanting to connect, but B, the purpose of those words that you're putting together in that sentence.
Yeah. How interested are you really? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So I wanted to touch with conflict. Yeah. Now I'm a leader. I'm embodying these skill sets, this attribute. I'm very I'm using integrity to my strongest advantage.
Yeah.
How do I deal with conflict? Is there an action steps to handling conflict? Because I know every conflict is so different. Is there a roadmap to solving all of them? Or do you just have to, stay with your integrity and then hope it works itself out? Like what's going on there with specifically handling conflict?
No, great question. Yeah. You got to have a plan. You got to have a script, right? And it's what you default to when, everything in you wants to just shrink back and say, no, maybe I won't deal with it today. It's like, no, you'd better. So some of the tips that I offer, the first is to get curious, right? First, let's just get curious about the situation. What is my story about it? When I see work that isn't quite up to my expectations, what's really going on? One of the best statements that John Maxwell uses, even though I feel like people reference him less and less these days with leadership, but he says, people don't always do what's expected, but people will always do what's inspected. And that's what I really love, that, where it's just like, hey, I'm not trying to pin you for work that you were slacking off on. I'm just going to shine a flashlight here, and I just need to know what's going on, right? And so the first is to say, okay, let me stay curious about, hey, I'm just wondering about this situation. Let me see what's going on. The second is to drum up 10 seconds of courage. That's a phrase I took from a pharmacist friend of mine to say, hey, you know what? You don't need to be Superman in order to run toward the fire. You just need enough to get yourself rolling, right? Like, let me find 10 seconds of courage to send off that email, say, hey, it's been a week since we last talked, and I was wondering if you could, tell me where you were with this. Or 10 seconds of courage, okay, let me pick up the phone and dial the number. And okay, now we're calling. And if I hang up, they're going to star 69 me and call me right back and wonder why I didn't follow through. So first is to get curious. The second, 10 seconds of courage. Okay, now that I'm curious, let me go ahead and just ask and see, let me make sure I'm not missing anything, right? Let me just hear their side of things. And the third is just to take your ego out of it and just to say, hey, well, hear their side. If you can, do the best you can to give them the benefit of the doubt, just to say, hey, I'm going to trust that this is my teammate and we're there for each other, and I'm going to trust that they're going to come through for me. And if there's evidence elsewhere, or that maybe to the contrary, let me address it with them as a teammate, right? Make sure, hey, we're still on the same side. What's the end goal? Do we agree on what even the end goal is? Okay. Right. Yes or no? If the answer is yes, okay. What do you need from me as a leader to make sure that we meet the expectation that we've agreed upon? Right. So now it is shifting from confrontation to collaboration. And that is a common question I use in my coaching. How do you shift from confrontation to collaboration? It's just like, oh, okay. And it's funny to see people kind of pause and then they realize, oh, I'm on the wrong side of the table. I need to come alongside this person. And so we can attack this problem together and find the solution together.
That's fantastic. That sums it up in a really good way. I want to ask and move into, who do you look up to as a mentor and a leader? And do you have any recommendations for other people? I know you've been name dropping a few people out there.
Yeah. I mean, the The people that I really love, yeah, John Maxwell was a clear, he wrote a lot of great books on leadership. And even if I never met him personally, yeah, like I would say, I would hire him in a heartbeat if he could, if he were available. The Heath brothers, Chip and Dan Heath, they've written 5 great books that have influenced my path as a leader, and also just I incorporate their material into a lot of how I coach. And I guess that Dan, both of them would be great, because I guess, and the reason I say that is during COVID, Dan actually had a webinar available for his newest book last March. And I tell you, Chad, like I about went schoolgirl crush when he showed up on the screen, and I'm just like, oh my God, it's really him.
Was it a fantastic seminar?
Oh, it's great. Yeah. The content itself was, I already read the book, so it wasn't like he was telling anything new, but just to hear his interaction with the audience and their questions and things like that, it was just really, really, really inspiring, because I know how much he's helped people through their books, and, just to see that. I'm trying to think other names. David Allen is another one I would recommend, more on the productivity side, because he wrote a book called Getting Things Done. And his system is so great that you can get certified in his methods. Like that's how great a brand that he's done for productivity. And so he's like, I can't tell you which direction you're headed in, but I can tell you how to build a ship that's really, going to be fast and lean and help you get there. So those are the books I tend to coach around. And then other authors, Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, they wrote the book Designing Your Life. And just the principles they have in that book are excellent in terms of just people I would recommend. So just like, hey, you know what? These guys are teaching some great stuff. Learn from them, please.
Fantastic. Thank you for the recommendations. It's a little bit of a selfish question for me to add to my reading list.
Not at all. No, I love meeting readers. I love swapping book titles. Absolutely. Please do.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask next, let's see.
Yeah.
Here. Okay. Among variant Asian cultures, is there a common thread or connection, or is there a common disconnection or different beliefs about each other? How is that interpersonal relationship among different Asian cultures function and work?
Good question. Yeah. I think the common theme is just recognizing the need for deference. The example that is used a lot is like the Korean airline flight crews that at some point were so deferential, even when there were problems, they didn't want to upset the captain because they didn't want to go above their rank. They felt like, alerting them of certain pitfalls that the captain might be oblivious to would be disrespectful. And then, not surprisingly, they had the worst safety rating of any major airline until other people came in and were like, hey, what's this cultural barrier that's ultimately, I don't want to, lose face. And it's just like, you're going to lose your life if what's worse, right? Losing your face or losing your life. Hey, do this, because you can't just keep dropping hints and hopefully they figure out what the real problem is, right? You're just like, hey, no, you're allowed to speak up. And this is not to upstage the person in charge. You're just trying to work as a team. And then, at one point, I think my mom would try to convince me to date and marry a Japanese woman because she says, they're very docile, they're very deferential, they're very submissive, And it's like, that's entirely selfish, just to be like, well, they won't put up a fight if I want to do something. So that's the person I want to marry. Right.
Oh my
that's
gosh.
just, yeah.
Pretty elder concept, I would say.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that doesn't fly now. I think that's the main common theme I see is just the fact that they're taught to honor, and in a way that's a great thing, just to say, hey, look, this authority is in place, and as long as you trust that they want what's best for you, then it's best for you to honor what they're trying to tell you. At the same time, when you realize that the people in charge are also flawed human beings that also, also have opportunities for improvement and also have blind spots, then, to be able to have a respectful dialogue, even if you disagree, I think is really where the turning point will happen, is when people realize, hey, we can be open about this, because the sooner it's in the open, the sooner we can actually address the problem and find a solution.
It's fantastic. All right. Thank you. What is your biggest fear in life?
Oh, man. Good question. I love your podcast, man. This is great.
Thank you.
Let's see. Yeah, no, it's fun. Biggest fear. living with regret, I can't get rid of.
I respect that. How would you say that fear drives or compels you to live your life?
Yeah, it's just a continual learning thing, like anything else. I can't just preach it. I have to practice this, right? So whenever I have to go look out for coaching clients and I'm afraid of rejection, and it's like, well, Jerry, inaction is death. Like if you don't find the client, your company is going to die. And it's like, are you so hung up on like avoiding that sting that you're willing to basically let your company go bankrupt? And it's like, no, that's ridiculous. Or even worse, people are saying, and they mean this kindly. They say, well, if this doesn't work out, you can always go back to pharmacy jobs. And it's just like, no.
That sounds even worse.
Yeah, that's just, now I'll really hate myself because I just didn't really give it my full guns, trying to get this thing going. And so, yeah, like this fear continually, like it's not just enough for me to have fired people and, evicted roommate. And it's like the irony of professional development, right? As David Allen says, he goes, the better you get, the better you'd better get. Because guess what happens when you clear that challenge? Another challenge. Oh, if you actually finish your to-do list, guess what? You're going to get restless and find more stuff to do. And it's like, oh, okay.
That's fantastic.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's a fantastic answer for that. You talked about when we were referencing college and later on that you started building positive habits in your life, which just led to overall better existence. What are some habits you recommend for people who might be listening to just better their lives in general?
Yeah. Some of the habits that really I had talked about doing, but didn't actually start doing until I enrolled in the coaching class. Journaling and meditation. Like people, like don't knock it till you try it, guys. Just saying, right?
Yes.
Just try it for 3 months, and if you still don't like it, hey, you know what? You don't have to prove anything to me. Just say, hey, look, Jerry, I gave it an honest chance. It's kind of like dancing. You're just like, look, just give it 6 months. If you're still not happy with where you are after 6 months, just make the conscious decision. Say, okay, if I'm not like where I am after 6 months, okay, I will quit. That way, it's not like, well, you couldn't get good at it. It's not even that. It's just to make that realize, hey, you're in the driver's seat here. So yeah, journaling, meditation, reading a chapter a day of a book that will help you. I'll give a quick funny story where I met a guy who he was so ashamed to admit that he procrastinated. Like he's like, procrastination is a terrible habit for me. And so one of his friends turned to me and says, hey, Jerry, what percentage of people do you think struggle with procrastination? And I said, 100%. Okay, 90%, and the other 10% lie, right? And then, I was just trying to like lighten the mood. And the guy, here's what made it worse for me. He goes, yeah, I even bought some books on procrastination and how to deal with it. And it was just like, you haven't read them, have you? And they're like, oh, and it's like, you hadn't. And it's like, isn't that sad? Like, you can't even get to the book that's supposed to solve your problem for not reading the book. And even worse is if you read the book and still didn't do anything about it. Like, what am I supposed to do with you, right? And so, yeah, just, hey, shrink the change, right? Can I read 5 pages a day? Sure. All right. Hey, that's all you need. So journaling, meditating, reading. And if you want to really stretch yourself, have one conversation a day with someone who's not in your circle, right?
Nice.
Just say, hey, you know what? I don't know a lot about your culture. Would you mind teaching me some things that you think I wouldn't know about or appreciate? I mean, can you imagine like the way society would be if everybody did that? I mean, you don't have to be new friends or anything like that, but just learn something new, right? True. Have a greater appreciation for another perspective and have more empathy, really. I think we can't get enough of that.
That's, I think you touch on that point of having curiosity forever and always being willing to learn. I think that's actually my biggest fear is the idea of being taken away from my free will to be able to keep evolving and learning as a human. So, which is also, thank you for this conversation too. I feel like I'm just gaining so much from it, which is fantastic.
Happy to help. Yeah.
Okay. So I touched that. I'm trying to think, where did I want to go next? Yes, I remember now. You referenced meditation. Is there any specific styles, or disciplines or geological locations in which you, try and emphasize their practices of meditation the most?
Yeah. Good question. So I haven't gotten into a lot of the more intricate things like tantric or anything less like that. I just keep it very simple. The app I'll plug is called Smiling Mind. It's basically the free version of Headspace.
Okay. Yeah, I know that one.
Yeah. And basically for me and my routine, what works best for me is simply setting an unguided 20-minute meditation where I just set the timer and, it just basically lets you know when time is up. And so the challenge, though, I would start off with an unguided one. If you've never done this before, start with one that's a little more scripted and we'll tell you, hey, focus on what your body is feeling or focus on your breathing, things like that. But once you get a pretty good idea of what it takes to meditate well in terms of trying to focus on your breathing and, let thoughts, whatever thoughts in your head run around and without trying to hang on to one or grasp one too tightly, you'd be surprised at the effect that it has when the timer goes off, because you realize, oh, wow, like it's just great to just empty your head in the mornings. And also, on one hand, brain dump things in your journal as well, but also just to say, hey, what are you grateful for? Like to realize, hey, okay, let me get this out of my head so it's not in my head. But at the same time, let me write down some things that are going to be helpful and keep me in a productive mindset the rest of the day. So the simple answer is, 20 minutes on Smiling Mind and see where that takes you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just become observant to yourself and how that interacts. Interesting, fascinating. I practice a lot of Indian-based meditation. So you referenced the one about writing things that you're happy for. I practice Munditi, which is a meditational scripture, an idea where you're focusing on the thought of joy for someone in your life that you care about, joy for the family around you, and then joy for someone you hate. And if you meditate on those three things, it helps just bring you, a better sense of peace. But that's what I've sort of been exploring recently. It's been very fascinating.
That's excellent. I may have to experiment with that now. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Of course. Yeah. I want to go into more spirituality and stuff, right? We're talking about meditation and that. What is your personal spiritual background, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah. It's been an interesting transition the last couple of years, actually. So the simple answer is that so in 8th grade, I was, being in Tennessee, right, you're surrounded by churches. And in 8th grade, there was a girl named Karen who moved from Pittsburgh and for some reason, befriended me. And she was very intentional with her Christianity with me. She was just like, hey, this is the way. I want you to know Jesus. I want you to come to heaven with me. Just very, very open about that. And, the irony is that as long as you have a certain level of success and stability in your life, you're not going to look for a higher power. And so it wasn't until high school where some of the friendships that I felt would be lifelong start to fall out. And, in high school, your problems are so small, but, for an insecure kid, right, you're just like, oh my gosh, my world is falling apart because we're not friends anymore. And so, whether people call it emotionally vulnerable or not, Karen invited me to a church camp. And, so in Christian terms, I accepted Christ. I basically said, okay, I believe in Christianity. And as a quick side note, we can argue history and theology all we want, but at the end of the day, the only reason people come to embrace Christianity is their need for forgiveness. And they say, hey, you know what? I need forgiveness, guidance, and love. And I believe Jesus is the one who gives me these things. And don't get me wrong, the journey with organized Christianity has been a tough one. The campus ministry I was involved with in undergrad, it felt like a lot of legalism and a lot of spiritual manipulation. And, it wasn't until I got, to pharmacy school where I was involved with an organization that was better about, hey, finish your degree because this is how you leverage, your faith in terms of patient care. And then I was still kind of in this weird phase of, okay, what does this look like? Okay, read my Bible, pray, go to church, and then just kind of live the rest of my life. What does this mean? And it wasn't until, and this continued while I was in Houston, I basically got burnt out on a lot of volunteerism with nonprofits and things like that, which was ultimately, I'm happy for what I learned being involved with those organizations, but then I realized that, I couldn't keep being the hero. And, it wasn't until a couple of years ago when I went to Beirut on a convention with some Arabic Christian doctors, and I heard some really, really crazy clinic reports for areas in Damascus or South Sudan or North Africa, other things. And it just really put things in perspective for me when I realized just how small I was. I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm just one person, I believe God is doing things through me that are meant to help restore dignity and serve others, especially the marginalized. At the same time, how do I as Count Zinzander says, how do I preach the gospel, die and be forgotten? You know, and it's a sobering thing that I need to, you know, consider how I'm living that out every day. It's just how am I dying to myself and how am I serving people? And so, yeah, that's kind of where things are. Basically, what we like to say is that, you know, Jesus is right, and we need to align our priorities and our beliefs alongside his. And how that plays out is different for everybody. I can't tell people whether or not they need to be a missionary or they need to work more with refugees or work more with homeless. It's not for me to decide. At the same time, I do hope it's something that they're intentional about evaluating. Even if they are Christian, I just hope that, you know, for people who are, you know, Hindu or Muslim or other, right? I mean, just to ask yourself, hey, this is what you say you believe. That's wonderful. And then how are you living? You know, do you really believe that? Because I'll be happy to admit, sometimes I struggle with what I call functional atheism, where we have this concept of God, but we don't live like he really exists, that we really depend on him. So I want to be very mindful of the fact. Yeah, I want to be very mindful and respectful of the fact that, hey, look, I'm not doing this to sound like super spiritual or super insightful. This is just one beggar telling other beggars, you know, what kind of bread they're eating. Right.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I like to ask that question to people just so it can live in its space, but allow others to just hear and express maybe something that they haven't heard before. And then I like to lead into, you know, some more intrinsic value-based questions or otherworldly questions. What is your concept of love? How would you define it?
Yeah, good one. We talk about it so much, and yet people are just like, well, what does it mean to really love?
Right.
Loving is wanting and giving what's best for another person, no matter how much of a sacrifice you have to make.
Wow. That's extremely vulnerable, because there's something that's extremely humbling about being willing to release yourself to this idea of internal and dire sacrifice for someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is your concept of evil and how it exists in the world around us?
Oh man. Yeah, because it's definitely there. Evil is focusing only in how you benefit from someone, no matter how much it costs the other person.
Fantastic. And the last one of these types of questions, what do you believe is the meaning of life?
I think it's a movie. Just kidding.
It's a simulation.
Yeah, right. I think Monty Python had a movie with that title. I mean, life, I believe the definition is to figure out what makes you flourish, and then to help others flourish in their own way as well.
Okay, I like that. For the next 10 years of your life, what do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? Do you have a bucket list? Sort of what's I guess the next 10 steps for you in life?
Oh man, yeah.
You don't have to say all 10 of them, but I guess where do you see yourself going?
Yeah. No, that's good. Just as a side funny answer at one point, because they ask these things in pharmacy school admissions. They're like, what do you see yourself in 10 years? And what's hilarious is one of my friends was like, sitting in my room, staring at a wall, wondering where the last 10 years went. And, you know, and he said, he's like, I wanted to say that. I didn't actually say that. But I mean, in 10 years, I want to see my business off the ground. I want to be able to free up time to do, you know, serve in third world countries where, you know, and explore new places just to learn about other cultures and what's really out there. And to do it with, you know, a woman, and to share that with a woman that I love, and to really also continue to serve the people that I feel called to serve, whether it's other Asian American leaders or, you know, overlooked minorities. That's just what I want to do. I'd be able to wake up excited knowing that, hey, like I'm putting enough content, useful content out there, and people are recognize its value and are excited to compensate me for it. So yeah,
Fantastic.
I'd love to see that. Yeah.
Awesome. And then the last question I ask every single guest that comes on my show. And if you are someone who's listening right now, if you had to give advice to them and they were young, they're old, maybe they're having a midlife crisis, maybe they don't know what they want to do with their life yet, what is the one piece of wisdom from the experience you've had on this planet that you would want to leave with them that is like the most essential?
Yeah. If I had to say anything or recommend some steps, I would just ask them to just do a mind dump on a blank sheet of paper and just say, hey, what's on your mind? Just write it out and say, why is this on my mind? So then you ask why, and then you say, do I like what's on my mind? Yes or no? What do I want to be on my mind? Write it down. And then if this is what I want to be in my mind, then how will I live out? What are the next actions I can take to act on what I want to be in my mind? I would say that would be a start.
It's fantastic. Thank you for that. And I want to, before we wrap up here, because I know we are getting to the end of our time, this has been a fantastic conversation. Do you have any channels, any things you want to plug for people where they can check you out, how they can find you?
Yeah, thanks. The one social media platform I focus on is LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And then my website is called Adapting Leaders. And so I have a specific newsletter I don't make available just by visiting my website. So I'm going to provide the link here, and that is adaptingleaders.com/join. So that newsletter is specific to people who hear this, and that will have exclusive content and insights and other fun stuff to keep you in the loop with everything that's going on next. So, yep.
Awesome.
Start with there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing, and I'll definitely have to sign up for that mailing list myself. This has been a conversation with Jerry Fu. I want to thank you so much for giving me your time, and I think it's been such an insightful conversation. I can't wait for people to have the opportunity to explore some of the topics we discussed. So have a great day.
All right. Thanks, Chad. We'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you, and see you, folks.